Hi, my name is Beth Parker, presenting on Module 13, Tort Liability for EDL 951. Well, what is a tort? Tort is part of civil law, and it is a wrongdoing that is taken to court typically for monetary damages and involves an injury of some kind that is sustained by a person, either just due to someone else's or another party's negligence or an intentional action. And if those people are found liable, then they could have to provide some damages for that person that was injured. There are several examples of tort law in schools, and I'm going to give you 5 of those today. The first one is Cheshire versus Sharp. It occurred in Texas. The court case was heard in April of 2000, and it included or involved a teacher by the name of Sharp. She was presenting an alphabet lesson on the letter D and decided for that day that she would bring her electric skillet and they would fry donuts in celebration of the letter D. Unfortunately, Cheshire, the student, 5-year-old, tripped on the electric skillet cord, and that hot oil splashed up and burnt him in several places on his face and neck. So those parents did sue, and really came down to whether or not that teacher had the ability to use her discretion in deciding whether or not that activity was appropriate for the lesson and whether or not she was acting in the scope of her professional responsibilities. And the courts found that she was in both of those cases, and found that she was immune from further action in this case. The second case is called Butler versus McNeil. It occurred in Georgia, with the case being heard in October of 2001. Lisa McNeil was a teacher that was next door to a classroom where a substitute teacher was at. And in that classroom, a number of young men were not behaving themselves, and Butler, a middle school boy, was one of them. So when Lisa McNeil came over to assist the substitute, Butler was reportedly banging his chair into the wall and causing some problems, and just back-talking Mrs. McNeil. So she went over to him, she put her hand on his shoulder, the other hand on the back of his seat, and asked him to come with her to her classroom to cool down. And at some point, she heard a noise coming from her adjoining room, so she turned to look, and he fell out of his chair. And so when she turned back to see what had happened, he was climbing up off the floor. Didn't appear to be injured, actually left, went to her classroom, and then left again without permission, and she located him and took him to the principal's office. Well, the family later sued and said that he had been harmed by Mrs. McNeil for the action when he fell out of the chair, and so he had never displayed any kind of injury and did not support that claim in court either. And so because there was no injury, no malice or intent displayed, and the teacher was acting within the scope of her professional responsibility by monitoring the classroom, helping to supervise and discipline students, the court found that she was also immune from further action in this case. The third tort case in my presentation is called Barrett versus USD 259, which is the Wichita School District. And this is a sad case. A senior boy who was out for football, first day of practice. They had started practice at 8 in the morning, had several different activities, breaks, water breaks, and then around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he had been complaining for a little bit of time that he wasn't feeling well, had been given numerous water breaks, and he collapsed, and Alex Barrett then passed away the next day in the hospital. And so in October 2001, this case was heard, and it was a little bit of a lengthy trial because a particular statute or part of a statute was being evaluated, and so that was what they call the recreational use exception. And what that means is that any kind of employee that is working within the scope of their job and using a recreational space, could be a park or some other public space, would not be found liable for any damages that occurred during that time. So at first that particular statute was found unconstitutional by a judge, and then the Kansas State Supreme Court reversed that, found it was constitutional, and used that particular part of the statute then to find that the district and the coach were immune. In this particular case, there were some proactive actions that had taken place, but still, unfortunately, the student passed away. In advance of the football season, the athletic director at Southeast had provided a handbook to the coach, had a meeting, discussed heat illness. There had been trainings by the Kansas State High School Activities Association. And so that was why the parent then originally sued for negligent supervision. So the fourth case is Grammons versus Dollar. It occurred in Georgia in July 2010 is when the case was heard. Grammons was the teacher. David Dollar was the student. He was an 8th grade young man. And in this class, they were using air pressure and water in a 2-liter bottle to send that like a rocket into the sky. And so students would pull a string and it would pull a metal pin and then shoot this rocket. And unfortunately, when David Dollar pulled that string, the metal pin hit him in the eye. And now this particular school district did have a strict eye protection policy, and one piece of that policy said caustic and explosive materials. So if those were being used, or if those situations were going on, then the case or the policy should have been put into play and every person should have had eye protection. So the parents did sue over that reason. And at first, the courts found that the school district and the principal were found immune because it was a discretionary action and they were working within the scope of their professional responsibilities. Then Grammons, the teacher, in that first case was found that further action could be taken against her, that she had what they called ministerial duty, not discretion. So that there was this policy, she should have administered the policy instead of using her discretion. Well, that case was appealed by her, and the next court found that the teacher was also not liable or immune to the case. And the reason for that was they looked at the caustic and explosive material line in the policy and found that there was discretion. Was the air pressure, was the water really something that could be considered to be explosive? And so that was what they decided, and she was immune. The last case was a mom, TW, who was filing on behalf of her daughter, JT, and it was a number of people, including a principal, a school district, a teacher's aide, a secretary, and then an 18-year-old former student of that school. So happened in Alabama in March of 2007 when the case was heard. And what had happened was JT, an 11-year-old girl, had gotten sick at school, called home, and was waiting to be picked up. A 18-year-old former student had come into the office and had visited with both the teacher's aide that was assisting that day and the secretary, and told the teacher's aide that he was there to pick up his younger sister. So when JT arrived to the office, they let her go with this young man, and he proceeded to sexually assault her. And what happened at school was after they left, the teacher's aide said, "Gosh, what a nice older brother he is." And the secretary knew that wasn't true. So they actually stopped the sexual assault once they tracked the two of them down. Well, the parents of JT did sue, the mother did, and there were a number of different cases and appeals again. And the school officials were found that they were performing within the scope of their professional responsibilities. Big issue was whether or not there was a specific guidelines or set of guidelines for releasing students to siblings or other contacts. And there wasn't a current policy in place. They're actually working on one, and the superintendent did testify that it was up to the discretion of the principal, and the principal ensured the courts that they were doing the same thing they had been doing previously in the years before the case. So again, the school officials were found immune in that situation. All right, a few things to consider. In every situation, particularly in those that might lead to further action or involvement by attorneys, administrators and other officials are going to be doing a number of reactive measures. So in all of these cases, there would be a lot of documentation of what the incident was and the specific communications you had with parents, agencies, the student, witnesses, and then that would be part of the investigation by the administration. The administrators might also include the police, other agencies like DCF if needed, and they would also be in contact with their attorneys or with KASB officials. So those would be the things that happen after the case or after the incident. And then those that happened before would be proactive measures. And that would be like what happened in the Barrett case with the trainings, with the discussions, and sometimes that they prevent those unfortunate incidents. Um, sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. So, but frequent review of board policy, training, counseling of staff, and then consistent follow-up and supervision would be really important proactive measures. All of that falls in to the professional ethics and really what's the backbone for how we handle situations before they get to one of these cases. So constantly, if you are working all the time as what's best for kids, thinking about safety, considering where could staff members be liable, and then professional responsibility of supervising so that students aren't left to their own devices, and then communication and documentation are also very important. So just very important to be a professional, think about what's best for kids, and keep people safe. Thanks for listening.